In my opinion, music is a very important aspect of cultural expression. However, culture is dynamic, and so is music. And speaking particularly from my point of view, as long as the ensemble understands the cultural context of the music and consciously chooses to incorporate some elements that complement the music, for me, this is fine.
ChoralEd. Hello, fellow choral directors, and welcome to another episode of ChoralEd. I'm your host, Micah Bland. Thanks so much for watching. Today, I am so honored to be joined by Ken Wakia as we continue our series on selecting diverse repertoire. Ken is the founder and director of the Nairobi Chamber Chorus with notable performances at the 2019 ACDA National Conference and the 2012 Queen of England's Diamond Jubilee celebration. To read his full bio and to learn more about his many professional accomplishments, check out his website linked in the description below. Ken, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, when a choir performs music from Kenya, what musical elements are important for an ensemble to incorporate to authentically represent the culture?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mika, for Micah, I believe,
It's okay.
for this very kind invitation. And particularly, I want to say on behalf of Kenyan choral experts, conductors, singers, and choral students, I want to say thank you very much for taking an interest in Kenyan choral music. I feel that in the arena of world choral music, Kenya is still a bit under, shortchanged. We are not out there compared to our counterparts in other parts of Africa. So thank you very much for taking the interest to have an introduction into Kenyan choral music and musicians. To answer your question, we would need to understand that Kenya and broadly African choral music has largely evolved from traditional folk songs. And really, I don't think that this is a phenomenon that is unique to African choral music, as you well know. Of course, we have original compositions as well, but Kenyan choral music as it is, I would say that it has evolved from majorly from traditional folk songs. So, as a way of background, um, Kenyan choral music, rather Kenyan music, and from now on, when we talk about music, I believe we'll be referring to choral music. So, as a background, I would like to say that Kenyan music is extremely diverse. In fact, some people might even argue that there is no such thing as Kenyan music. But I would disagree with that school of thought and say that there's really Kenyan music, in my opinion. The proponents of there is no Kenyan music often say that there is only music from various communities in Kenya. But I would like to argue that because those communities are Kenyan communities, therefore their music is really Kenyan music. So it may be that Kenyan music is diverse, but there is still Kenyan music. And so to talk about the elements that I would like to see in in a performance of Kenyan music will be determined by that diversity of where is the music coming from, which part of the country. And just to give your audience a taste of how diverse Kenyan choral music or Kenyan music is, I would like you to go ahead and play a few seconds of some of these videos. And please do play the first video. Okay, so you've played already 2 of those videos. And I want to say that the first video you played is from the coast of Kenya. And this next one is from central Kenya. Now, I just want your viewers to be taking note of the differences. So if you just play the first video again, and I'll tell you when to play the second one. Thank you. Play the next one. Thank you. Now, from those videos alone, you can see how diverse the music is. And we started, the first video was from the coastal part of Kenya. And the second and the third videos was from the central part of Kenya. And then the third and the fourth and fifth video were from the Rift Valley part of Kenya. And the next one was from western part of Kenya. And all these are extremely different in all aspects, but similar in certain aspects. So in the second part of your question, I would like to say that depending on the background of the music, the traditional background of the music that you'll be performing, there will be different cultural elements that should be included. And these elements are like the rhythmic elements, the melodic patterns. And some of these melodic patterns sometimes include ornamentation, because the ornamentation is intrinsic within certain cultural music from Kenya. And all this is very unique to a specific cultural group from Kenya. We call them tribes. We have about 53 different tribes, and each tribe has its own its own culture, which music is included. Costume plays also a very important part in our music. Movement and instrumentation are, of course, part and parcel of our music. And we often would, even if people were just, they're just sitting down and singing, you will always find us moving. It could be shaking our heads, shaking our shoulders. And if your audience will go back to those recordings, they could analyze them further and find that there are very important differences in the parts of the body that move depending on where the music is from in Kenya. Um, Context is another very important thing to take care of when doing Kenyan music. When you're performing Kenyan music, you need to first of all find out in what context was this music originally performed. Because there are songs in Kenya that you do not just perform them anyhow, at any time. There are certain songs that have sacred meanings to them, and they would potentially be performed only during various religious ceremonies. Now, there are also certain songs that are only performed during events such as circumcision. And those songs are meant to be performed only when those events are taking place. Of course, of course, times are changing. Times are changing and cultures are changing. And so it is not unusual to find that some of these songs that were close are now coming out in the open, and people are beginning to perform the songs whenever they like. But that is still it's still not widespread. It's still very, very little. Poetry is also a very important aspect of our music. A lot of our music has a story behind it, and it's good to understand the story behind the music when you're performing it. I would say that these are not all the elements that people need to take care of, but they're most of the elements that I would quite recommend that people did their research and tried to incorporate some of these ideas.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I really appreciate all the videos that you provided. It really kind of can identify the different styles in these groups here. And you answered several of my follow-up questions that I was thinking about as far as there's 50 plus different tribes. And so they're all have their own differences. And I'm sure they're all different dialects as well, probably. Is that correct? A lot of different languages or subtle differences, at least, in those languages.
Yes, yes, that is exactly correct. Because officially we have 42 tribes. However, within those tribes, we also have sub-tribes, which makes it way more than 50. So even within those sub-tribes, and you will find that the dialects are different. If you take, for example, I will tell you there's a group called the Luhya, and most Kenyans will just say they're from the Luhya tribe. But when you talk to someone you would consider a Luhya and you call him or her a Luhya, they will tell you, "Oh, no, 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 wait a minute. I'm not a Luhya. I am Bukusu, or I am Maragoli, I am Tachoni, I am Wanga." So there are all those nuances in our tribes. Hence, you find that the dialects within even the officially recognized tribes, there are so many dialects. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And you also talked about the similarities between all of them, and would take one of those similarities is probably dance and movement. And so maybe can you expand on that a little bit more as far as you're talking about certain tribes also had certain movements. So maybe could you give us some, I know that's very difficult with 50 tribes, maybe all the subtle differences, but what are some of
Yeah.
the bigger, more common choral works or movements that we should be maybe aware of?
Yeah. I will tell you that when you're doing music, say from the coast, as we started with a video from the coast, it's important to realize that the movement of people from the coast is often concentrated around the shoulders, but also around the waist. So, if you find videos of performances of people doing a piece of music from the coast, you'll find that the emphasis in movement is around the shoulders and around the waist. But then, if you come to central Kenya, their movements will be concentrated on their legs between their ankle and their thighs. That's where the movement is going to be much more concentrated. And then you move further away from Central, you go into the Rift Valley and you find a lot more graceful movements and people, using their shoulders and their torso, that kind of a movement amongst the Maasais, and you find that they are extremely graceful. And then if you move further west, you will find the Luhyas and the Luos, and there again, they really concentrate the movement around the shoulders again and around their waists. But then there's a lot more the vigor, the intensity of the movements are also very different. You find that, when you're in the Rift Valley amongst the Maasais and the Kalenjins, the movements are a little more graceful and emphasizing um, the body kind of flexibility. While when you're in the coast, there's a lot of that, a lot of quite vigorous movement. And then you go to the western part, you find again that vigorous movement in those parts. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those because I find that very fascinating in the sense that I don't often think of different movements and how people dance as far as the different cultures and tribes and subgroups. So that's really interesting to learn about and kind of I could see those as we went along for sure and see those different elements that you were talking about. We also saw a lot of instruments and various instruments in those videos. And so can you talk a little bit about how and when should instruments be added if they're not really indicated in the score? Because some scores, I'm sure, just assume that you'll include the instruments if you are knowledgeable in this, and sometimes we're not as knowledgeable as we should be of
Yeah.
various
Yeah.
types.
Um, no, absolutely. For us, instrumentation is a very important part of our performance. And in contemporary choral music from Kenya, it may not be indicated in the score, but it is expected that you will use instruments. Just like the dance, you will always feel the instrumentation in a piece, even if it is not included. This is because our instrumentation is improvised in every performance, so it's very hard for a composer or an arranger to indicate that you must play the instrument in this particular pattern. Instruments were very unique to the player themselves. We had people who were just famous for playing the instruments they played. If you go to the western part of Kenya, there is an eight-stringed instrument called a lyre, or in the traditional name, it's called a nyatiti amongst the Luo. A nyatiti player was often renowned for his prowess in playing that instrument. But every time you listened to that Nyatiti player, he would never play the same melodic pattern twice. There might have been consistent traditional melodies that they would play, but every time they were embellishing their play. So instrumentation is very individual to the actual player, and that's part of the reason that it's not really indicated. Um, but so sometimes you might even listen to a song that is not accompanied by instruments, yet you will hear the instrument. In fact, you will subconsciously hear the instrument in that performance, even though it's not indicated. I don't know if you can go back to your uh, recordings and play the second one. Can you get to the second
Yes,
recording?
sure. Kind of as I'm pulling this up, I wonder if is that in some ways sometimes composers notate the voices as the instrument. Is that kind of in some way how it's used?
Ah,
Or
yeah, well, I can answer that. Yeah. This performance does not have instruments, but it has movement.
Mhm.
And we can talk about why I did not include instruments in that at another time. But um, uh, what was your follow-up question again?
Yeah, so sometimes I know like I'm thinking of Latin American composers, they'll kind of imitate the
Ah,
instrument with the voices only, so it's a cappella music, but they like boom,
right,
they have some
right.
different sounds. So I wonder if is that ever a thing in composers for from Kenya?
It is, but I would say that it is much more contemporary.
Mm.
Um, it is a contemporary phenomenon because I'm later on going to talk to you about this massive music festival in Kenya, which has really been the one responsible for building most of us. Not most, but all of us, really, all the musicians in Kenya have gone through this music festival. But because we had the instruments anyway, there was no need for imitation of those instruments. Um, the choir would just get a player of that instrument. Um, but in areas where you could feel that voices were imitating instruments, there are certain traditions that have chanting background, you know. So the closest we get to, I mean, traditionally, the closest we get to voices imitating instruments is the chant culture in some of the tribes in eastern Kenya. But today, it's very common to find choirs imitating instruments with their voices. And that's because there is a growing interest of choirs taking pop music and introducing it into choral, regular choral music. So they get the various instrumental lines and give those to voices, and you'll hear a lot of percussive vocal styles going on. I had a teacher who was very, very good at this, and he would create a lot of percussive vocal parts in his choral music. So that, in my opinion, is a new phenomenon in Kenya.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, I could think about the music I was thinking of from Latin America, and as far as it's kind of that more contemporary pop song, where they're taking a pop song and kind of
Yeah,
making it to a vocal arrangement, and kind of
yeah,
there's the a cappella traditions in the US as far as vocal percussion and so forth.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So we were talking about several things earlier, and you mentioned several things earlier, and so I want to talk about this idea of what may be not appropriate for an ensemble to include. And so we talked about some movement. Well, is that appropriate for some ensembles to include? I also heard in the first one from the coastal region some what I would describe as bird noises, I think, and some sometimes they call it ulations.
Ah,
Ulations. And are those acceptable for choirs to include? And you also talked about um, certain songs and for certain ceremonies and other things, are there songs that maybe we shouldn't perform because they're for a more sacred or special ceremony of some type? So, yeah, that's a big question, I know, and it's probably difficult to answer, but what should choral directors be mindful of when performing music in a respectful manner?
yes, that's a big question. And quite honestly, I know that the American society, particularly um, the choral society in America, that's a big topic at the moment, I believe. But in my opinion, music is a very important aspect of cultural expression. However, culture is dynamic, and so is music. And speaking particularly from my point of view, as long as the ensemble understands the cultural context of the music and consciously chooses to incorporate some elements that complement the music, for me, this is fine. It is happening in Africa, it is happening in Kenya. We have a very big um, conversation right now I think it's probably the whole world, about this generation called the Gen Zs. Um, I think we cannot ignore it. We cannot ignore the fact that there is a population that is out there and they think differently. I can tell you that in Nairobi Chamber Chorus, for example, I've had to accept certain things that go against my belief. I'm very big on researching the cultural context of a piece of music that I'm performing. And a lot of times I invite my singers to then choreograph the dance movements, and they do, and they come up with these dance movements that are not authentic to the music that we are performing. I look at it and think, I don't like that, but it kind of goes, and it's not in any way in conflict with the message of the music and with the originality of, well, it may be in conflict with the originality, but it's that dynamism of culture that we have it's a fine line. I think it's a fine line. So for me, incorporating elements that are complementary to the music, consciously understanding what the music is about, because if you consciously understand the background of the music, then often actually it will help you um, direct your movement towards a style that is not so far-fetched, because the moment you understand the poetry behind the music, then you can use the movements to incorporate and to complement the music. However, incorporating elements out of ignorance is for me a no-no. If you tell me that this movement goes with that melody, then I ask you, but we are singing a dirge. That movement is suitable for a celebratory, joyous occasion. How is that movement fitting in? So in that circumstance, I would say that if you don't understand the background of the music, then introduced to the performance. I believe that people should not shy away from performing music from other cultures as well. You know, especially in this day and time where research has been made very easy with technological access. And by the way, when I talk about technological access, I do not mean in any way your chat GPT kind of research. I mean you can almost always find an authentic interpretation of any song by reaching out to native speakers, you know. For example, you are somewhere in wherever. Where are you? Connecticut? No, no, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin,
You're
yes.
in Wisconsin. I'm in, I'm in a totally different part of the world from you. But hey, here we are discussing about authentic performance of Kenyan music. So I don't think people have any excuse today about performing music that is not authentic or that does not respect the culture. I'm I'm all about people from all cultures performing other people's music. In fact, I'm going to ask you to play one choir that I stumbled upon online performing Kenyan music, and that is number 8. I found this to be absolutely amazing that this choir from Pennsylvania Academy of the Performing Arts was performing this Kenyan music by a former teacher of mine who I really do respect. So here we go. Thank you. And this is exactly what I mean, that people should not shy away from performing music from other cultures. I was so impressed to bump into that YouTube recording of that choir performing that piece that I know very well. And I've performed many times with my choir. It was written by a former teacher of mine, David Okukuzalo. So yeah, it's a it's a it's a it's a tough conversation that I know people are having right now. But my take on it is do not shy away from performing music from other cultures. However, please do your due diligence, and we have no excuse for not doing that today.
Yes, and so talking about doing our research and finding resources, thanks for providing all those videos, and I'll be sure to include those in the links, and maybe that can help some people get started as far as maybe where to look. But do you have any suggestions for resources of where choral directors can look to find how to best emulate the various styles?
Yes. I mean, there are so many Kenyan composers, and I could spend another 50 minutes talking about the composers from Kenya. But I just want you to play a few seconds of the next set of videos, and I will then respond to that question. So, video number 9.
Kinyange kamera ngombera wandu. Embezi kambira ngombera wandu.
Now, before you play the next one, you can see that all these videos are actually on YouTube. And so for me, YouTube is really a big source of information today. Because some of these groups' websites. And today there are so many groups in Kenya. So, but I also want to talk specifically about one special resource, and that is an 97-year-old Kenya Music Festival. If anyone ever has a chance to come to Kenya, I would encourage them to plan their trip to Kenya around the first, second, and third week, actually, first and second weeks of August, and then try to attend the Kenya Music Festival. That's the national level. It's an extremely beautiful festival that has been around for 97 years, and it starts from a very low level, very small, um, very small regions, and comes all the way to the national. And the teams that perform at the national level have gone through those levels. So if you're listening to a song at the national level, it has already gone through about 4 other different levels before it reaches there. So you can imagine the quality. And this festival brings together about 800,000 Kenyan school children and adults in one space for a whole 2 weeks of choral music, dance, and poetry. So the Kenya Music Festival, you can find them on YouTube or online, and they will be a great resource. The various um, websites, but if you go into YouTube and type in any title of choral music from Kenya, it will then lead you to websites. But again, you know, people like you are good resources because you have the networks. I think networking is also another very useful resource. So, I just wanted to talk briefly about, not to talk about, but just to introduce some of the composers that you may want to check out in Kenya. That American choir was singing a song by David Okukuzalo, an extremely wonderful composer from Kenya. Another one is Sam Otieno, the late Sam Otieno, the late Dr. Arthur Kemoli, and George Mwiruki is actually still living, and one of his songs was performed by one of the videos you played. Video number 11 is by George Mwiruki. He's still around. Another wonderful composer is Sylvester Otieno. One of his pieces was also in those videos. Henry Wanjala is another one, still around. The late Boniface Muganga, really wonderful composers and arrangers from Kenya. Geoffrey Mukoto is a living composer. Ochieng Makokeo, the late, is a wonderful composer. And finally, I want to, in a very special way, recognize this young lady, Esther Buyecha, who I would like for you to play video number 17. She's one wonderful lady that is wading the waters amongst men, and she is a great musician. I would end there with that recording of Buyecha being performed by Wazalendo group of singers.
Nari Nairobi nimpurira nibo besi mubakeni becha babogorereka basamya babucha musibanja oroto lelo nyango yecha musani mukosi Nari Nairobi nimpurira nibo besi mubakeni becha
Thanks so much for those resources. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Um, yeah, no, I would just like to say um, thank you very much for this invitation, and I do encourage your listeners to look out for Kenyan choral music. And I again specifically want to recognize um, one of the choirs that really motivated a lot of Kenyan choral music, and that is Muungano National Choir of Kenya. Uh, of course, my choir, the Nairobi Chamber Chorus, we are always happy to share Kenyan music. There's also a very active group called Pambo Africa that does a fantastic job, and your viewers can look them out. And a very, very special mention to this group, which I find incredibly amazing, called the Wazalendo Group of Singers. They really do a great job in trying um, to bring forth arrangements of Kenyan music. Those are groups that are of mixed voices. There are also several other groups that are either male voices only or female voices only. The choral industry in Kenya has really expanded and exponentially, since I started going to the Kenya Music Festival, which is where we all go through. I have seen a wonderful development of independent choral groups because previously almost all the choral groups were patronized either by schools, universities, or colleges. But nowadays we are finding a lot more independent choral groups um, popping up, and that's a good thing.
Well, great. Thanks, Ken. It was very enlightening and I found it very interesting. And I know our viewers will enjoy digging into some new music to check out for sure. And I hope they can program that with their works. To our viewers, thanks for watching. And I hope you continue to inspire the future leaders of our world through this wonderful gift we call music. Thanks.